What if I told you the WNBA is standing on the edge of its biggest era, and the next step could either launch it into a new stratosphere, or slam the brakes right when the world finally started watching? Because here's the headline that sounds simple, but gets messy the second you look closer. The players just authorized union leadership to call a strike, if necessary. Not an immediate walkout. Not, everyone stop playing tomorrow. But a loaded weapon sitting on the table, while both sides stare each other down. And that's why this story isn't just about money. It's about leverage, optics, trust, and a very specific deadline that's creeping closer with every headline. So let's talk about what's actually happening, what both sides are really saying, and the quiet details casual fans never hear. Because those details are the difference between players standing up for themselves and a fight that could backfire hard. The first thing you need to know is this vote wasn't some fringe thing. It was overwhelming. Massive turnout. Massive support. It basically told the league, we're unified enough to pull the lever if you push us there. But notice the wording, when necessary. That phrase is doing a lot of work. Because a strike authorization vote is like cocking the hammer. It doesn't mean the shot's fired. It means the next phase of negotiation is about fear, and who blinks first. And the timing couldn't be more intense. This current agreement has been extended again, and the latest extension pushes the deadline into early January 2026. That's not far away. That's the kind of deadline where one ugly week of headlines can change how fans feel, how sponsors feel, how broadcasters feel, and how owners feel when they're deciding what's worth it. Now here's where the story gets spicy. Both sides are describing the exact same negotiation like they're living in two different realities. The players' side says negotiations are stuck, and they're trying to fix long-standing issues. Everything from revenue sharing to working conditions, travel standards, facilities, family planning benefits, the whole package. The league's side fires back with a very corporate version of that's not what's happening, basically saying the union's public framing doesn't match the ongoing talks, and emphasizing that it's offering meaningful improvements, including a revenue-sharing approach that grows with the league. So on one side you have, we're not being taken seriously. On the other side you have, we're negotiating in good faith. And if you're a casual fan, you hear both and think, okay, who's lying? But here's the real truth. In labor disputes, the loudest argument is almost never the most important one. The most important fight is usually hidden inside boring words. Words like revenue. Words like share. Words like net. Words like gross. Words like defined. Because if two sides can't agree on what the pie even is, how can they agree on slices? And that leads us to the part that made people's jaws drop. Reports have described a proposal where the salary numbers look absolutely unreal compared to where the league has been. We're talking about maximum salaries climbing into the $1 million range and rising toward the kind of figure that would change a player's life overnight. We're talking about average pay jumping into territory that used to sound impossible for this league. We're talking about minimum salaries rising so high that the floor suddenly feels like a new world. Let that land for a second. Because if you're watching from the outside, especially if you're a normal person with a normal paycheck, you hear that and go, wait, what? That's life-changing money. And that's exactly why this blew up. A lot of fans looked at those numbers and instantly took a side. Not based on the structure. Not based on the fine print. Just pure gut reaction. How do you say no to that? And it's a fair emotional reaction, until you remember something critical. Players aren't just negotiating a salary number. They're negotiating what the league is becoming. If you believe the league is about to explode, bigger arenas, bigger TV deals, bigger sponsorships, then the question becomes, are you getting paid like a league that's exploding? Or are you getting paid like a league that's still asking permission to be taken seriously? That's where revenue sharing enters the chat. Because salary can be a ceiling. Revenue sharing is a lever. Salary says, here's your raise. Revenue sharing says, if the league grows, you grow. And in sports, that second part is how players stop feeling like employees and start feeling like partners. But then the negotiation gets dangerous because revenue share sounds simple, but it's not. It depends on definitions. If the players say, we want a share of revenue, the next question is, share of what revenue? Ticket sales? Merch? TV money? Sponsorship? Streaming subscriptions? Expansion fees? Do you count the same dollar twice if it moves through multiple entities? What gets deducted before the split? And that's why these deals can turn into trust wars. Because if players don't trust the accounting, they won't trust the offer. And if owners don't trust that a higher share won't destabilize the business, they won't sign it. So you end up with this weird situation where the public debate looks like it's about greed or entitlement or boss versus workers. But privately, it can be about something way colder: control of the future. Now, the most fascinating part of this whole thing is what's happening in the background at the exact same time. The WNBA is clearly positioning itself for a bigger era. Massive long-term media rights are coming. Bigger platforms, bigger exposure, bigger stakes. And that's not a small detail. That's the whole reason the players feel like this is the moment. Because if the league is about to get paid like a serious property, then players don't want to be stuck in a before contract while the league collects after money. That's the nightmare every union tries to avoid. You do the hard years, then the boom arrives, and suddenly you're still paid like it's the old world. So from that perspective, strike authorization makes sense as a signal. We see the future coming, and we want our piece of it. But then you hit the uncomfortable question fans always ask next. Is the league even profitable? And this is where people start talking past each other. Because profitability is complicated. Some leagues operate at a loss while scaling. Some losses are strategic investments. Some money moves in ways fans can't see, especially when ownership structures are layered. But here's what matters for negotiations. Even the perception of fragility changes how owners negotiate. Owners don't negotiate like fans. Fans negotiate emotionally. Owners negotiate like, can we sustain this year after year, even if something goes wrong? And here's the part most people miss. The WNBA's ownership structure is not simple. You're not negotiating with one single boss. You're negotiating with a network of stakeholders with different priorities. Some want aggressive growth. Others want tight sustainability. Others want certainty above all else. Which is why just pay them sounds easy, but becomes a nightmare when you're the person signing checks that must clear every year, not just in the best-case scenario. Now add one more ingredient, and you get the part of the story that turns into internet gasoline. Alternative leagues and player-led ventures. On its face, that's not scandalous. That's athletes building opportunities. That's entrepreneurship. That's women's basketball expanding into more products fans can watch. But during a heated labor standoff, optics become weapons. Because critics will look at anything adjacent to other leagues and scream, see? They want the WNBA to stumble so the other thing wins. And supporters will respond. That's ridiculous. They're building more options because the ecosystem needs it, and because players deserve more ways to earn. And here's what matters. You don't need a conspiracy for this to get messy. All you need is a headline culture that loves drama more than details. So if you want to talk about this without sounding like a tinfoil channel, you keep it grounded. Even if nothing shady is happening, public perception can still turn it into a controversy. And perception shapes fans, media, and sponsors. That's the entire battlefield narrative. Which is why both sides are communicating the way they are. The union emphasizes solidarity and long-term fairness. The league emphasizes growth, partnership, and we're offering meaningful improvements. And the fans? The fans are split into camps that talk past each other. One camp says, if you don't strike now, you'll never get your worth. The other camp says, if you strike now, you'll lose the momentum. And that second argument is the one that scares people the most, because the WNBA is at a delicate point where attention is broadening. When casual fans show up, they don't show up because they read labor updates. They show up because something feels exciting. A rivalry, a star, a moment, a vibe. And casual fans are also the easiest to lose. Hardcore fans ride out controversy. Casual fans dip the second it feels like drama replaces the game. That's why this negotiation is so high stakes. The cost of ugly headlines is higher than ever. But here's the twist people don't want to admit. Sometimes the ugliest fights create the biggest long-term wins. That's how labor history works. A strike threat can be a disaster, or it can be the only reason a league finally modernizes. So how do you tell which one this is? You look at the endgame. There are basically three outcomes. The clean outcome is obvious. Both sides reach a deal, the league markets it as a new era. Players feel respected, owners feel protected, and everyone moves forward without the season being touched. That's the outcome everyone smiles about later. The messy outcome is a deal that comes late, after weeks of public sniping, where one side claims victory, the other side claims betrayal, and fans walk away confused, but the season still happens. That's survivable, but it creates scars. And then there's the nightmare outcome, a real disruption. Because the moment games get threatened, you're not just negotiating terms. You're negotiating the audience's patience. And patience is not guaranteed. If the public thinks the dispute is fairness versus greed, sympathy flows. If the public thinks it's people already getting a huge raise still demanding more, sympathy dries up instantly. And the scary part is how quickly that flip happens. One week the narrative is, pay them. The next week the narrative becomes, they're asking for too much. And once that second narrative takes root, it becomes very hard to undo, because it connects to something deeper than sports. People's personal financial stress. When the average person feels squeezed, watching millionaire-level numbers, whether it's an athlete, an executive, a celebrity, can trigger resentment. Not because the athlete is wrong, but because the viewer is hurting. And resentment isn't just comments. It can affect brand decisions. It can affect media framing. It can affect how aggressively partners promote the product. That's why both sides care so much about how the story is told. Now, here's something else most people don't think about. Even if you believe the players are 100% right, timing still matters. Transitions are when businesses tighten up. Transitions are when investors get cautious. Transitions are when decision-makers become allergic to instability. So the strike authorization vote does two things at once. It increases leverage, and it increases perceived risk. And the league has to weigh both. Now, if you're wondering why we keep circling back to definitions, it's because this is where negotiations can quietly collapse even when the headline numbers look huge. A league can offer a massive salary jump and still offer a revenue share structure players don't trust. A union can demand a bigger share and still struggle to convince owners it won't destabilize costs. And if neither side trusts the other's numbers, you can't logic your way out with a spreadsheet. You need transparency. You need enforceable rules. You need a model that feels fair when things go up and still works when things go down. But let's be real. Even if they announce a deal tomorrow, the fan debate won't stop because this story has become a proxy war for something bigger. What is women's sports worth? Some people still talk like women's sports should be grateful for any investment. Others talk like women's sports has been underpaid for decades and should get a correction, fast. And the WNBA sits right in the middle of that argument, because it now has the clearest combination of bigger mainstream awareness, more exposure, and players organized enough to force the issue. So here's the uncomfortable question that decides how this ends. What happens if both sides believe they're the heroes? The players believe they're fighting for fairness and a future that respects their value. The league believes it's protecting sustainability and building a structure that doesn't collapse under its own weight. And when both sides believe that, compromise feels like betrayal. That's when labor fights get dangerous. Because each side starts negotiating with the public instead of negotiating with each other. One side leaks numbers to make the other side look unreasonable. The other side emphasizes principles to make the leak look like propaganda. And the audience becomes the jury. So what should you watch for next? Watch the language. If you start hearing more about transparency, definitions, and shared growth, that's a sign they're moving toward a framework. If you keep hearing broad statements like "we're not being valued" versus "they're misrepresenting," that's a sign the fight is still mostly narrative. Watch the deadline pressure. As the early January 2026 deadline gets close, the incentive to settle rises, because neither side wants to be blamed for the moment the league lost momentum. And watch the outside noise. Because the more side ventures get pulled into the discourse, the more this turns into an optics war rather than a contract war. Now let's land this with the real cliffhanger. This could be the moment the WNBA finally updates its structure to match its audience. Or it could be the moment a growing league learns the hardest lesson in sports business. Fans don't fall in love with negotiations. They fall in love with games. And if the public starts associating the WNBA's breakout era with labor chaos instead of highlights, rivalries, and must-watch nights, that's a brand problem no salary increase can fix. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think the strike authorization is smart leverage that forces a fair future? Or do you think it's a risky move that hands momentum back to the skeptics right when the league is trying to level up? Drop your take in the comments, because this story is moving fast, and the next update could flip everything. And if you want the next breakdown the moment the next major detail drops, Whether it's a surprise concession, a leaked framework, or a deadline day twist, make sure you subscribe right now. Seriously, hit subscribe because the next update on this could be wild, and you don't want to miss what happens next.